We're delighted at Moneycontrol to be joined by Professor Arvind Panagariya, Chairman of the 16th Finance Commission, Professor of Economics, and Jagdish Bhagwati, Chair of Political Economy at Columbia University, also the Chancellor of Nalanda University. Professor Panagariya, delighted that you could make the time, sir. Sir, let me begin by asking you about the wider economy. The RBI just put out 6.7% economic growth numbers, revised upward from 6.6%. What do you make of these numbers? Is that more or less what you expected? How does we compare with other economies, and what impact will this have on foreign perceptions of the Indian economy at the moment?
My view has remained that Indian economy is robust. It has been growing around 7% or a little better.
Right.
And I expect it to continue to perform along those lines. Maybe I think RBI's estimate or forecast is still on the lower side. I think we'll come out at least 7%.
Okay.
Maybe better, but that is where I have been. And I think year after year I've been proven right. And virtually everybody revises the growth rate upward as the year comes to an end.
So RBI, I think, is being overcautious.
Probably.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, certainly relative to where I would be, I would not hesitate to say that we will do 7% for sure. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that, that last quarter for which the latest data came in, we grew 7.8%, in spite of the fact that a part of that quarter had been impacted by the events in the in West Asia also. But we weathered that quite well. The economy, managed to remain on this high growth trajectory in spite of the.
So do you still hold the view that the rupee will at some point go below above the $100 mark for the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar? And what did the actions we took on FCNR be? Was that enough?
So, look, it's not a matter of my belief. It is a matter of the markets. And given the fact that our inflation rate generally is higher than the inflation rate of our other competitors, and especially when you look at the US or Europe, it is inevitable that rupee in nominal terms will continue to depreciate at some rate. I think there was a lot of backlog of depreciation that was needed, because there was a period, during which rupee, even in nominal terms, had actually not depreciated at all over a period of 9 or 10 years. If you look back the history from 2003-04 on till 2011-12 or so.
Right.
Because, like 2003, the rupee was probably 48 rupees to 47 rupees, 48 rupees to a dollar. And then 2011, if you look at it, it was again 47 rupees to a dollar, so in nominal terms, at least by 1 rupee, it depreciated. And so a lot of the depreciation that subsequently happened was a correction for lack of movement during those years. I think now the RBI, by letting it depreciate quite substantially over the last 2 or 3 years, has brought the rupee in a reasonable place. I think, one never knows, this is not something that, because what is the appropriate exchange rate, we really don't have a good sense of, but still, there's no doubt that there's a lot of backlog of depreciation that had to happen, which has now happened. So I would expect that the rupee will not depreciate as much as it has depreciated in the last 2 to 3 years.
Right.
But it's inevitable at some point it'll cross the 100 rupee mark. I mean, these are the power of the markets is so enormous that at the end of the day, no institution can really keep the exchange rate from moving in a certain direction.
So, from a point of view of the foreign investments in India, sir, there's been a lot of concern about net FDI. There's been concerns around FII money leaving India. There's been some green shoots or turnaround in, say, July. If you look at the numbers now, what does India need to do from where you sit to attract more FDI into India and to get FPIs and FIIs to sort of to return to the Indian markets?
Yeah. So, this is a perennial question for us. And we, there was a time at which we had virtually no FDI. We go back to 91, 92, it's like $100 million or something per year. And we took a lot of steps, a lot of deregulation was done. And as a result, FDI became, positive and grew at significant rates. But now I think we need to do a bit more. India remains, I think, for the foreigners, a very difficult place to do business. And you can see that, much of the foreign investment that comes in India, meaning DFI, direct foreign investment, comes into private equity. You don't see foreigners actually setting up companies and enterprises themselves in India. Unlike, say, in China, for example, and that is very reflective of the difficulty of doing business for the foreign entities.
So, any specific things, one or two reforms that would be your top priority if you were to suggest to the government on what we should be doing to change that scenario?
Yeah, so I think it's not a matter of just one or two reforms, which would, I think the whole set of things, our attitude, we have been a bit over-regulated. What has happened is that the license Raj kind of is gone, but some of it has been replaced by what I have been calling permission Raj. We require simply too many permissions, and then for any of the things that you fail to comply, the regulators can get you. I think that really needs to change. I mean, it is something now that requires a lot more detailed work compared to what my comparative advantage is. I sort of write much more on
you made the argument earlier that there has been a lot of a creeping sort of protectionism which is increasing.
Oh yeah, certainly on the trade side. I mean, trade side I can speak to more definitively in terms of the details. Yeah, the kind of non-tariff barriers that existed have been resurrected now. Through all kinds of permissions there also. And then you have these quality control orders which have multiplied. Not to mention the fact that the kind of anti-dumping we do, there is no equal of India there. We have got about less than 3% share in the import, in the global imports, and we are the largest user of anti-dumping. Almost anything, and it really seems to be, anti-dumping seems to be far more effective in sectors where you got one or two domestic producers. So these large producers who are incredibly inefficient, effectively go in, make their case to the Ministry of Commerce, and the Ministry of Commerce obliges.
So, in terms of Indian or the bilateral trade treaties that we've been doing, there has been an argument which has been made that maybe we need to change the way we do our bilateral. There have been a slew of bilateral trade treaties, UK, and many others, while the Indo-US trade deal is still being negotiated. Do you think we need to change the way, do you think we need to get more out of these treaties?
See, look, I mean, among the bilaterals, two of these that we have done, one with UK and with the European Union, I'm much more hopeful, because these are large players.
Right.
And they can exercise some bit of their own strengths to get market access into India. That I think is a good thing, because to me, ultimately, it is a great thing to be able to get access to these large markets, particularly the European Union, for our exporters, but much more so it is also the fact that it opens our own markets. And that I think is a big plus.
So in terms of
it's not that issue. I think the bigger issue is our general structure and levels of tariffs. Our general tariff levels are still high. They ought to come down.
where do you think we are getting stuck on the India-US trade deal, sir? I mean, what's our sort of bottom line, and do you see that getting resolved soon?
So I don't think I certainly don't have the information exactly what it is that has held up that agreement for.
But how important is the deal for us?
For that long? Well, again, I see it is very important from the viewpoint of opening our own markets. We need competition within our own market. That's essential. And now, once we have signed the agreement with the European Union, it is all the more essential that we sign one with the United States, because in effect, what you are doing is you're creating competition for the European Union within our market.
Right.
You see, so right now, the way, if there is an agreement with the European Union and not one with the US, then in effect you have yielded the market, even in the commodities and the exports, that United States is more efficient at manufacturing than the Europeans. The market will go to the Europeans.
So in terms of foreign FIIs and all of that, there's long been this debate around long-term capital gains tax, that there's a debate around whether we should remove it and all of those things, like market like Singapore. What is your position on things like that?
So these are levels of details at which I don't operate. These are complex tax issues unless you've looked at the details, what the regime is. There's also a connect then to personal income taxation, etc. So one needs to look at it.
So at a larger level, given we started off by talking about the latest economic numbers, and you said you were much more optimistic about those numbers than what we have now. There has been a narrative in the last few months about of negativity around the India story, right? That things are moving down, all of that. Do you think that where you sit in New York, how do you see the narrative playing out, and do you think that narrative is overblown?
It is overblown, because what happened? They were saying that things are collapsing, etc., and they were piggybacking, I think, on the West Asian oil crisis. As soon as the crisis went away, suddenly all the critics also disappeared. So I was actually saying on social media that what happened to all the Indian economy is in crisis walas. Suddenly they disappeared.
So two final questions. At a larger structural level, you've been studying the economy at multiple levels for a very long time. There is now a lot of debate in this country about, or a lot of nostalgia or reminiscing about the 1991 economic reforms and what that opened up for the Indian economy. If you were to compare that era, what has changed between then and now? And if you were to compare the Manmohan Singh reforms with the Modi era, how would you compare the two eras, the reforms that Prime Minister Modi has ushered in?
So let me just put it this way. People who are writing the history of these reforms are the ones who are involved in doing those reforms. So there is a lot of kind of biases in the telling of that history. So let me go back, allow me 2 or 3 minutes here. This requires explanation because there is a lot of confusion around it. What were the reforms done during that period? Especially I'm talking the 91 reforms, which is the claim is that investment licensing ended. The claim is that import licensing ended. Tariffs were incredibly high, and there's no tariff reform at least not in the first 91 reform. There was a big exchange rate reform because there were 2 devaluations of the rupee, which was very important for subsequent progress that happened. But did we really end investment licensing? I bet you would say that yes, it was completely ended. But it was not really completely ended because you had some 850 items on the small scale industries reservation list.
Right.
Not only no licenses would be issued on that for those 850 products, you wouldn't even apply for such licenses because these were basically reserved completely for for the small little enterprises. So where was the large scale production in those industries? The licensing on those products which were accounted for all the labor intensive products remained. So what was why did they leave that out? On import liberalization, import licensing, you did the intermediate inputs and you did the capital goods. You left the consumer goods completely. But the consumer goods is the most important anyway if you are thinking in terms of industry's capability, right? I mean, that's the last stage of all kind of assembly products that you could manufacture. They were still left completely under the imports for consumer goods were left completely under control. So did the liberal, and of course I'm not even mentioning the labor law reform, which was also a critical aspect of it. It was discussed at the time, but didn't happen.
Right.
So there is a great overstatement of the 91 reform also. I don't want it to take away from it. I think Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister Rao, really was very courageous to have done it. What was done was very important. We shouldn't undermine, we shouldn't understate that the importance of that reform, because symbolically that was extremely important. But it is not as it is sometimes represented that, it was so well conceived and internally consistent, etc.
And in comparison, the sort of the change that happened now.
Now come to the Modi era reforms. Some of those were the most difficult reforms, politically most challenging reforms. Why did it not? I mean, GST was written out from the very early on by Vijay Kelkar. So it's not like we didn't know about that reform, but it took a very long time, and in the end, it involved about 2 or 3 constitutional amendments and then legislation, etc. It was the most difficult reform.
You've written about this for
bankruptcy
law.
Bankruptcy law. I was writing, and I shouldn't be even taking credit. Actually, there was a task force during Vajpayee era on unemployment appointed under whose chairmanship? Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Montek Singh Ahluwalia himself had actually talked about both labor law reforms and the bankruptcy law reform, and said both had to be done for the exit policy to be fixed up fully.
They were too difficult politically.
Then for 10 years, Montek Singh Ahluwalia was the Planning Commission chief. And we had Dr. Manmohan Singh and we had Mr. Chidambaram. What happened? No bankruptcy, proper kind of, state-of-the-art bankruptcy law was put in place. Finally, ultimately, it was the Modi government that actually brought that law. So some of the, very labor law reforms in the end, we talked about it under Vajpayee era, and then during the 10 years of Dr. Manmohan Singh, we didn't even talk about it. I mean, labor law, there was a provision, at least in the special economic zones draft legislation, that the Vajpayee government had produced, but was not able to carry it through the parliament, and it expected to return and then pass that law. In the end, the UPA government came to power, and they shelved that. They basically rewrote the special economic zones law, in which the labor law reform provision that existed in Vajpayee draft of it was taken out.
So when we look at the structural nature of the economy in the mid-90s and the structural nature of the economy now, the nature of companies in the top 100 companies has changed. The sectoral weightage has changed significantly. But also one big thing which has changed is financial inclusion in a very significant way in terms of the building blocks of the economy, with JAM and all of those things. If you can talk a little bit about that change, what has been the underlying change in the superstructure itself in the last 30, 40 years?
Yeah. So on the technology side, we have done wonders building it up. So the whole, the digital platforms that have been put up, they've been fantastic. So on one side, certainly on this side, in facilitating the life of both entrepreneurs and people, what the Prime Minister calls the ease of living and ease of doing business. On the technological side, massive improvement, massive conveniences have been created. A lot of the things for which you had to actually go to an office, you don't have to go to office, you can do it online. Now, on the other side, there is the regulatory side. There, things have become worse. On the regulatory side, we have simply put in too many regulations. And departments that should not be involved in regulating become involved. Multiple departments. You need permissions, so you need whatever clearances.
So we need cutting of the Gordian knot there in some
multiple
ways.
Departments. So I think on that side we have done worse. I think on net, a lot of very good developments, particularly using technology. But
so can I ask you something about two final questions? One is, there's a lot of debate around the middle income trap, that while our per capita income is increased and all of that are we in danger of getting stuck in a trap at the moment, and what is required to break out of that? And the second is, you've written a lot about education reforms and about education. You've co-authored papers on that. In the light of the protests recently and the Gen Z protests and all of those things, what structural changes in the education system we need from where you sit?
There's a long discussion for which we probably don't have the time now, but I've written quite a lot about it. So on higher education, the broad point is that we are still operating under the 1956 University Grants Commission Act. That's a very old, archaic law which needs to be replaced by a more modern one. Just as we did actually, by the way, on medical education, also we had that problem under the old IMC Act, the Indian Medical Council Act. And there was a whole tyranny of the old Medical Council of India, which had to be ended. And under Prime Minister's leadership, Niti Aayog actually piloted that reform. Similar reform is required on higher education as well. So that has been a bit overdue.
Right. And in terms of which sectors we need to focus on to get out of this middle income trap, a quick comment
on the middle income trap. At the moment, I don't see that I have a concern. I think we are maintaining our growth rate of about 7%. So there is no reason for me to be pessimistic just right now. But at the same time, vigilance, of course, is required, and what entrepreneurs are telling us about very kind of complexity of regulation and permissions that are required. I think there will be needed. Very important, actually, where the focus needs to shift is urbanization.
Right.
I think this is where we are lacking action, and this is largely a state subject. States have to step up, and the way I like to think of this at a broader level is that the cities have to be business friendly. See, our focus often has been on how to make life better for the people who are already living there. But of course, what you require is the expansion of the cities, creation of new cities, and for that you require the businesses to create jobs, because in the end, how will the cities expand? Through migration.
Right.
From rural areas to urban areas, from the incorporation of the peri-urban areas, urban outgrowths into the municipal corporations of the existing cities, and these are the ways in which urbanization kind of proceeds. And in India, in fact, much of the urbanization really has happened either from the natural organic growth of population, urban population, or through the conversion, meaning these are really census towns. So those have been the two, but migration has played very limited role. Rural-urban migration has played a very limited role. Most, about 20% of urbanization is accounted for by migration, and that has not changed very much over the last several decades. We have data only till 2011, because that was the last census we conducted. But that is where the action is very much required. Make cities business friendly. I think, firms that will create jobs, which will then in turn encourage migration of workers out of rural into urban areas. That, I think, is the crux of the matter, that to maintain the momentum. Because look, ultimately, if we are talking of a developed India by 2047, we have to hit urbanization at least to 60%. I mean, I don't think of any, I can't see, I don't know of any country which has become a developed country, South Korea's, Taiwan's, largely China now is also in that, roughly in that category. Urban population has to account for at least about 60% of the total population.
Right.
I think we are on that front very far from being there. And similarly, there's a closely linked issue of the agricultural share of the workforce, which is incredibly high in India, almost 46% by the last census last PLFS, which I remember 23-24. It was still 46%, quite high. 24-25 has come in. I will check those numbers, but that so this is a connected issue that agricultural workforce has to become non-agricultural part of it. It has to drop. The share of agriculture in employment has to drop to close to about 25%. Urban population has to become about 60%.
Right.
And those are the frontiers on which we still need to be working vigilantly, and that's where the state level reforms become extremely important, to which not enough attention has been paid.
Professor Panagariya, thank you so much for talking to us at Moneycontrol and for sparing your time. Thank you.
My pleasure.